How's the recruiting going? Are we seeing people come into the pipeline?
I haven't seen any yet, but I see Pedro's note about volunteering. We did have a lot of volunteers, which was great for helping with facilitation. So that was good.
Cool.
Yeah, I left some questions. Let me see, where is that issue? I think it's your research issue, Holly. I don't know if it was that. Yeah, basically talking about with Emily about if it would make sense to recruit users using just one screener survey. I don't know if you saw that.
I did not see that. I don't think. I've started going through all of my emails that have been kind of backing up over the past couple of days yesterday, and I haven't gotten to that one yet, so I'll take a look. But I had spoken with Anjay, I believe, who is the one of our researchers, and he was suggesting the possibility of having two separate sets of scenarios to address different user types. Is that kind of what she was referring to in terms of two different or multiple screener surveys targeting different groups? Or I'll take a look and see.
Yeah, she said that it was cleaner for her to keep the recruiting efforts separate. And yeah, because I wasn't sure how the distribution of the screener was made, if they just sent out to the whole GitLab First Look members, or if they would divide it in two. But yeah, I'm seeing her responses, so yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I do know what you're talking about now. I did see that, and I remember her saying that it was easier to keep those separate, which I think made sense.
Yeah, and what I was just talking with Marcel regarding the volunteers to moderate, which I was, as we were both saying before this call, we were both hoping for like a fair amount of participation. But even so, I was surprised and happily surprised that we had a lot of volunteers. And I'm thinking that the most, maybe the most reasonable and productive thing would be to share the volunteers across both scorecards, because I mean, we're doing them at the same time. People have volunteered. So unless they have a very strong preference for like issue tracking or code review, I'm thinking that we could share them. Of course, like people, for example, Mike, you volunteered for code review. Regardless if it's code review or issue tracking, I think people would moderate the same category, of course, the same category scorecard. But other than that, I feel like it would be helpful to share them. What do you think?
I think that makes perfect sense. I wonder if there's value too in you and I switching at some point, and you taking one of mine and me taking one of yours, just to have a little bit more
I like that.
on each of our aspects. I'll put that in the notes.
I like that. I'll volunteer for yours.
Same.
Cool. Yeah, one of the things that I think it's a final tweaks to the screener is just putting the GitLab logo and all of the little style changes that we need to make in Qualtrics for each survey, but also adding a time zone question so that we can then direct the participants to the right moderators and like hand them out the right Calendly links. Yeah. I'll let you know once it's like in a good place. I mean, I think I already shared it with you, but once it's in a better place, I'll ping you again maybe.
Your survey, you mean?
Yeah, about the survey. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. And I'll do the same. I set you up as a collaborator in Qualtrics. Did you get the email about that?
Yeah, I got the email about that, but I haven't looked at the screener again. I have been busy with other things, but yeah, I'll take a look.
I think it was pretty similar to the screener survey template that we have in there, but I had worked with Lori on it, and she had given me, I think, 1 or 2 additional things to add. And then I added in also some common tasks that they could check off as things that they do as part of their day-to-day. But other than that, I think it was pretty similar to what you had.
Yeah, the only important aspects that were not part of the default screener survey, I think, were the GitLab individual contributor license agreement or something like that, or contributor agreement, which I think they need to, it's mandatory, so they need to say that they agree with that license or agreement or whatever it's called. And the other thing is the time zone question. Other than that, I think, yeah, it's the default screener is enough.
So in terms of like the steps or like prepping to start recruiting, recruiting starts, and then people are getting scheduled, and then we do interviews. Where are we in those phases? Are we still in the prepping to recruit, or are we actively recruiting, waiting for people to get scheduled?
Prepping the recruiting.
Okay. You know, from past experience, how long does it usually take to recruit, 14 participants? Because I think that's the average number that we're looking at, right?
Yeah, I think in this case, like the duration that I saw in the handbook was, for example, 2 weeks if you were recruiting a very specific kind of user. For me, the kind of users that I'm recruiting, like one of them is just software engineers, and then the other is almost any kind of user. And then one other is a bit more specific, but we just need 5. So I'm thinking that I hope that in the maximum 1 week, we can get all of them. And that doesn't mean that we need to wait until the end of the screener to get all of them. We can immediately start scheduling as soon as we get responses. And then we see, like, this is like a good candidate. Let's put them forward and then have them schedule ASAP. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, so there, I see the recruiting issue for issue tracking livability. It's hard for me to kind of gauge like how what the progress is.
On
I see a comment. Yeah, I see a comment from Emily. Has she started the recruiting process yet?
So I'm glad you said that, actually, because it's a little unclear to me as well where we are in that. And I wonder if that's something that we need to dig into a little bit, is surfacing that information as we go a little bit better somehow. In the meantime, I'm happy to just check in with her more regularly and ask her how things are going. I think as of last Thursday rather, she said that it would be today at the earliest that she anticipated being able to start scheduling people, just because we were off on Friday. And she said that typically if she sends out communication about it on Fridays, that it's a slower response. So I think her plan was to start sending out information to try and start recruiting yesterday, but I'll confirm. Find out.
Yeah, there's a comment from her to fill out a spreadsheet. Have you looked at that yet? There's a Google Doc. It says to be completed by the requester, make a copy of this Google Doc.
That's for paying users after they've been tested.
Yeah, I just opened it and I'm like, that's not. Okay. So it sounds like she needs the screener to be ready in order to start recruiting. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And the screeners are done, or the screeners are ready to start recruiting with?
For me, it's almost done. I should have it done today.
Okay.
And I agree. It sounds like I've had both Emily and Lori review mine. And I think I do need to add in the time zone question, but I haven't received any other feedback in terms of tweaks. However, I'd love to just compare, Pedro, what you've got with what I've got and see if there's any last minute things that we can do. But I would say today for me as well, just to wrap up this final possible changes.
Okay.
And then Gabe had mentioned that he might have some users. Do we have a process surrounding that? Like, should he coordinate with Emily? And I had asked Emily this, but
yeah, those folks will need to fill out our screener so that, you know, that there's a record that they gave us permission to record them and everything. So I think giving them to Emily would be the best approach, and then we can ensure that those steps aren't skipped. And then, yeah, we'd also just continue to want to validate that they're actually within our audience realm, within the 3 roles. And or not only like if they are, but which role are they, and have that documented somehow. And I think if we go through Emily, that'll be more likely to be captured. So
I agree.
Yeah, and I don't think our problem is going to be that. Actually, that could be our problem, that we're not going to find, what is it, 5 participants per role. I think that's going to be, I don't know, I might be wrong, but I think that's going to be pretty tough to do in the time frame that we have. So I was wondering if we could, when we interview people and we kind of, you know, load balance it and like spread it among our volunteers, that we try to mix up, that we try to have all 3 roles interviewed simultaneously. So like, you know, somebody volunteers to interview, they're interviewing one role type, and then another volunteer is interviewing another role type, rather than kind of queuing them up by role. We interview this role, then we interview this role, then we interview this role. I think we should avoid that, because if we interview multiple role types at the same time, then we can see if we start hearing the same things, and we'll have an opportunity to either adjust our interview questions, or we could say, here's where the information is going, and we have confidence that it's going that way because we're talking to multiple types of roles. I think if we were only talking to one type of role and we tried to finish them by the end of the quarter, then we still wouldn't have like a lot of confidence in what we were learning, because it was only from one role type. Is that clear as mud?
Yeah, that's clear to me. Yeah, and I mean, at least for me, I'm what I was expecting is what I said, that as we get responses to the screener, whatever comes in that is like a good indication, like this is a good participant, a good candidate, it doesn't matter the user type, we just do the session as soon as possible. I think in my case, the most common user type that we will get is probably software engineer. So I'm assuming that there might be a good chance that we will do those first, or finish those first before the rest of the user types. But
It's because there'll be more of them.
I don't think we should force it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What is it? Does it feel realistic that we could get the screeners ready and in Emily's hands today so recruiting can start? Or do we feel like we need more feedback?
I think today works for me. I feel like it's at a good place. I just want to compare it with what Pager has to see if there's anything additional that might be valuable to add.
Cool. Do you want to do that here? Do we have the time, and are people ready to share here?
I'm happy to share.
Okay.
One moment, and I will get logged in. Just let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So the first couple of questions are just asking how people would, it's more, I think, the disclaimers and the kind of boxes that we have to have them check. So we're talking about how we're looking for people who would like to show us how they use GitLab. Then let's see, recording and accepting that. The sharing of the recording. Terms and agreement, and then age. Features, just having them check off the boxes of the features they use. Job title. Oh, actually, and it looks like this is radio buttons, but it seems like that should probably be checkboxes because it says feel free to mark more than one if you are responsible for multiple jobs. So let's change that. GitLab package that you mainly use, just a drop down with looks like our primary options, and then I don't know and I don't use GitLab. We are hoping to get, I think, at least one person who doesn't use GitLab for each of the roles, just to understand how it might compare with any tools or processes that they currently have and what their mental model is for project management in this space. Approximate size of the organization, tasks that they're responsible for. These are tasks that I put in just kind of based on the two primary roles of sort of the project manager or product manager versus developer. So I just put in a handful of things that I felt were relevant to try and kind of gauge where they might be. Rate your level of experience. This is another one that I added in just because we would ideally like to get a couple of people who are from various levels of expertise with the product. Although I don't think that that's one that's going to necessarily cancel out anybody. It's just more kind of information for us. And then the contact information. And I think that's it. It looks like this one was, these two were dumped. So still need to add in the time zone, but is there anything else that, Pedro, that you see that you have added to yours that might be missing from this that could be valuable, or Marcel or Mike?
I'm curious why we need to know their age.
You know, I was curious about that too, actually. That is part of the original screener survey, but I'm not sure that it's not critical for the screening process. It would just be something that could potentially provide.
As long as they're not under 18, that's all we care about, in my opinion. I'm concerned about the level of privacy.
Sure.
I don't want people to be, I don't want to detract people because we're asking so much personal information. But if we know they're under, if we know they're over 18, then that's all we really need to know.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. Yeah, I think the granularity of the responses is unnecessary. It should be just under 18 or over 18. That's the only thing we care about.
I think that makes perfect sense. I'm just skimming real quick to see if we're asking about age in any of these others, and it doesn't look like we are. So
one other aspect, it might be interesting to know if they are over 45, because that's an age that typically starts to experience vision problems that could affect their ability to work in front of a computer screen. But I don't think we're, you know, this study isn't about, is it? It's not about like accessibility, but maybe it's always about accessibility. So yeah, I think that's fine.
I mean, I think it's a good point. I think it could always be valuable to get that information, but I'm not sure that that's what we're trying to accomplish here. So
yeah, I look at those specifics and then the phone number, and I'm like, oh, this.
yeah,
I don't know.
I
think
agree.
it looks good. Yeah.
This was
Is that kind of?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Just that these last few fields, I believe Lori had added in, and I thought it was interesting that phone number was included. I'm not sure why she included that.
I think it might be in case something goes wrong. I think it's better to provide a phone number to them rather than get their phone number.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they do have a technical problem, they can reach us. But I don't think it's really appropriate for us to gather that information. Again, it's like, that's a lot of personally identifiable information.
I agree.
Yeah. I'm just collecting their email, not even the name, because that's, we don't need to know exactly their name.
Yeah, and that'll come up in the interview, right? Hi,
yeah.
Introductions. Yeah.
That's a good point. I'm happy to remove name and phone number then. I think that those are great points.
Yeah, and it just makes the screener shorter.
Yeah, and that definitely helps. I think it makes people more likely to complete everything. Cool.
We don't want to scare people. I think it looks great. I like the part about, I took a screenshot of it actually, about the different planning activities. I really like that part too.
Yeah, I just want a couple of things that I noticed in the age question. Maybe we need, instead of just being under 18 and over 18, we also need to consider the people that are 18. So maybe the last one should be 18 or older.
Makes perfect sense. We're excluding
Yeah,
one
that's
well, the purpose is to verify that they're over 18, right? So all we need is a checkbox that
18
says,
or older. Yeah.
All we need is one checkbox that says I'm 18 or older.
I like that. Instead.
Do you feel 18? Yes.
Exactly.
Did I just change the type of the question, or yeah, I did change the question. Let me think about how to phrase this question.
Yeah, that's okay. We don't have to do it now. Yeah, one thing I was wondering is why. What are the questions that you are going to analyze and map to the user types? And the reason I ask this is because you have a question about which features they use, and then you also have one about experience, and then you also have another one about tasks.
The primary ones I would say would be features. Title would be a key one. Package to a degree, just because like we talk about, we're exploring epics at one point, and that's something that's not available in all of the packages. Size of the organization, because I think that there's going to be a lot more process involved with an enterprise versus a startup, and I am curious about the differences in the two roles between those different organization types and sizes. And then this is really just going to be more so, I think, for me to know a little bit more about where they're at individually. So what I would really like to do is take this survey and create probably a spreadsheet per individual, and just have some notes in advance about maybe things that I want to dig into a little bit more. So if someone checks all of the boxes here for product management, then that might change how I conduct the process a little bit in terms of the questions that I ask versus someone who only checks a couple of the boxes but calls themselves a product manager. But thinking about that now that I'm kind of verbalizing it, does that run the risk of skewing the results because there could be a little too much difference in the process? Like I would still stick to my script, but I might add in some additional deep dive questions related to these answers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does in a way, but I think for at least for what I've read, the purpose of this category maturity scorecard is to have exactly the same questions and process regardless of which participant we're talking with. And what was the other thing? Yeah, and also they might not use any feature or they're not required to be at a particular level of like a tier of GitLab or something like that. And also the fact that we have the moderators, the different moderators, it would be difficult to have like to vary the process depending on which user type you're talking with and ask different questions. Yeah.
That makes sense. I agree. I'm wondering then, I like the thought of having these questions, but at the same time, I wonder if that could cause any sort of bias initially in me by seeing these tasks that they're responsible for before I speak to the person. If it is supposed to be, you know, as similar as possible from one to the next, it might be better if I do keep this question, if I don't review this data until after. And then in that case, it could be beneficial perhaps in providing insight as to why they answered a certain way. But,
so I think so we're just trying to have this as unbiased as possible and with a measure that is comparable across all participants.
Okay. And
to do that, we just need to put the right people or fit the right people in the user types. And then I think what we might look out for to try to have a good distribution of experience and things like that is if they use GitLab or they don't use GitLab. I think that's important because you don't want to just test with people that are familiar with GitLab. And I think also your other question of how experienced you are with GitLab, I think would also be interesting to test with both novice users and expert users of GitLab. But other than that, other than like, are you using GitLab or not, and how experienced you are, I don't think anything else matters because it's just about their performance afterwards. Like, even for example, like the question that you had about features, how would you use the answers from that question to select the participants?
So this question was also part of the initial screener survey. And I think it was, okay. Lori had sent me also like a screener survey that she had created for something else. And so this was either a part of that or a part of the original, but it was something that was kind of inherited as part of this template. And when I read over it, I thought, well, that makes sense that we would want to know, you know, if they don't check epics and I'm trying to understand their use of epics, then am I going to get any valuable information from this?
Yes. So that relates to the...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that relates to their experience level with the product, right? So we're not testing the participants. The participants are testing the product, and so it doesn't matter that much if they are using the features or not. I think we should have a variation if possible of experience levels, like someone who has never used epics, someone who uses a little bit, and someone who uses every day. I think having that variation would be good so that we can have a good maturity score. But but not qualifying someone because they don't use epics, I don't think that's the point, because everyone, like most people, will probably be new to epics because epics is at the ultimate tier, and we need to validate the maturity regardless of their prior experience with epics or not.
That makes sense. So if they don't use epics because they have a tier that doesn't use epics, is there still value in knowing? I guess we answered the question already in this question below about the tier that they use. That helps us to know whether or not they're going to be eligible as test participants at that particular feature, because they won't have it if they choose maybe the free version.
Yeah.
I see your point, though. I see your point, and I think that makes sense. Do you think then that it would be better to just remove this question?
I think it's
I think it could be valuable to still have it to provide insight, but I agree with you that, well, the purpose of the screener survey, though, is to eliminate candidates, right? To find and then also eliminate possible candidates that are going to be the right fit for this testing session.
for the user types, yeah. But do your user types require that people use epics, for example?
The user types or the scenarios?
I mean, both.
The user types, the product manager type role, I don't think it requires that they use epics, but it requires that they, generally at least, there is a requirement that they have this concept of having a large feature or idea that has to be broken down, and epics is the way in which we typically satisfy that, or one of the ways. But then separately, the scenarios, in one or two cases, we hope that they are going to use epics because it is part of that breaking down process. So that's kind of what I want to understand there is, for people who maybe use the free version, how do they take a big idea, put it in our product, and then start to break it down without the use of epics? And then for people who do have access to them, do they use them? If they don't use them, why don't they use them? But that's, to your point before, that's really not the purpose of this particular study, I guess, is to understand that. So exactly. I'm glad you're saying this, because it's helping me to stay on track. The researcher in me wants to just take advantage of the situation and ask all the questions and understand all of the things. So it's a good reminder about what we're really trying to accomplish here.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's unfortunately, like, there's pros and cons, but in this case, it's just focused on the user performance. Sure. And that user performance, like, the user will always be right regardless of what they do during the sessions. Sure. And that will inform the maturity. And we can't ask them why they did something, right? It's just, they failed, they succeeded, they made X errors, it took this amount of time, and this is how they value the capabilities of the feature, or if it's easy to use, and that's it. Unfortunately, we can't ask them. Like, it would be amazing just to ask them, oh, why did you do this, or why do you think it's not helpful? But that's not the purpose.
I agree. That's great feedback. Thank you.
Go ahead. I was just going to say regarding the features that now that you were talking more about it, it might actually have some, it might actually help you triage. And again, I think the goal should be to have a good distribution of expertise and experience with the features of GitLab. So for example, if you had 5 possible participants, maybe you would like for one of them to have no experience with epics, another one with very few experience, another one that has a lot more experience, and one that uses epics all the time. So perhaps you could transform, and this is something that I'm now thinking of doing in my screen of service, transforming this features question. If they answer that they use GitLab, so that's the other question below, with the GitLab tier, which GitLab package do you mainly use? Depending whether they use GitLab or not, because one of those answers could be they don't use GitLab. So if they use GitLab, out of these features, how would you rate your experience? And maybe you can have like a matrix question with just a few features like epics, issues, issue boards, and maybe one or other. I don't know exactly which features you're testing. And then they would rate like no experience, you know, just something like that. A lot of experience.
That's interesting.
What do you think?
I think that's a good idea. And actually, while you were speaking, it made me realize that probably we should ask up front this question, because if they don't use GitLab, then it could impact maybe some of the other questions. So I'm wondering if that one needs to be bumped up to the top, and then we can do like an, if they say yes to this, then provide, you know, this path. And if they say, I do use GitLab, ask the question about having them rate their level of expertise with the various features that we want to understand.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing that I did was actually turn that question, what GitLab package you mainly use, into a radio button question, because I felt like the I don't use GitLab answer is very deep in the select. And I think that could cause people to not see the answer very well. Oh, there you go. Okay. Yeah, that, so, and when you're looking at in the preview, it looks much better than this, of course. And so what I was suggesting is, yeah, what you were saying, like bumping this up, and maybe if they answer any of those, except I don't use GitLab, we can show a question, which is basically a merge of your question about GitLab experience, like how experienced are you are with GitLab, but merge it with the features and have them rate the features. Because I think it's very difficult for someone, or I don't know exactly what, how helpful the information is if they answer, I'm very experienced with GitLab, right? Maybe what you want is to know how experienced they are with this feature or that feature. Because someone might consider, like, for example, if they spend 90% of their time in pipelines and they're very experienced, they're going to say, yeah, I'm very experienced, but I don't use epics.
Right. I think that's great feedback. I'll go through and make some tweaks then this morning. I know we're a little over. And then I'll share with you once that's updated. And if you'll just let me know once yours is up to date.
Yeah.
And I think we'll be all set.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of your feedback. You always have really insightful advice and suggestions, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. That was very insightful for me as well. I was kind of thinking out loud through this, and I'm stealing that idea of the features.
Cool. Well, Mike, is there anything else that you want to touch on, or Pedro, anything else before we wrap up for now?
I did find the UX research Kanban board, UX research coordination Kanban board. So you could, I'll put the link in our agenda. You can use that. I don't know if you've seen it before, but you could use that to kind of track where this recruiting effort is. So I'll put that in here. And yep.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thanks.
Okay. All right.
I'll see you in a bit then.
Thanks,
That's
everyone.
good.
Have a good day.
It was
Bye.
great. Thanks, Holly. Thanks, Mike. Bye-bye.
You bet. Thank you.